Greetings, everyone who has joined us already for our Thursday lecture. My name is Natalia Hrinko, and it is my pleasure to introduce to you our guest speaker who will be talking about the admission process for graduate programs in the USA. Our guest speaker today is Yuliia Sobko, who is career consultant at the University of Texas in Dallas. Yuliia, thank you for joining us today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for attending. I'll introduce myself again. My name is Yuliia. Originally, I'm from Dnipro, and right now I'm working as a career consultant in the University of Texas at Dallas. So basically, my job is helping students with career development. I help with major career exploration, with resumes, with interviews, and stuff like that. And today, I just want to share my story. If you have any questions, we will have Q&A portion at the end, so I'll be happy to answer those. Let's start with our presentation. Alrighty, grad programs in the US, admissions. I will just start with my path, with my bio. So originally, as I said, I'm from Dnipro, and I did my bachelor's in applied statistics, прикладна статистика у ДНУ, Dnipro National University. І це така дуже важлива деталь, тому що, I will transition to English again. And this is a very important detail because I changed my major completely. I changed my career path. So the first tip that I want to give you and something that I want to take away from it is that, yes, it is possible to change your major, change your field, and get master's or a PhD in something else in the United States. So after I got my bachelor's in Ukraine, and during that time, I was also working. I was teaching English part-time, plus I was kind of advising with study abroad, and I also did 2 work and travel in the United States. And overall, I had about 7 years of experience in teaching and advising at the time when I was submitting my applications. So that was a big chunk of my application materials and stuff like that. So it's kind of like an important detail as well. I also spent 2 years in China. I was teaching English in high school. That was also a very great experience, which helped me a lot with admissions, because this is something that really excited a lot of my colleagues and a lot of admission committees. So, and also kind of something on my resume. After that, I applied to get my master's in college counsel student development, which is I even cannot really translate it to Ukrainian, because I feel like this program doesn't exist in Ukraine. So basically, the purpose of this program is kind of combination of higher ed and higher ed in the United States, higher education, in kind of combination of counseling, psychology. So basically, the main purpose of this program is to educate professionals, not only career consultants or career counselors, but overall professional student affairs field working in the higher education institutions. And a big chunk of my program was also counseling. So I had like a lot of psychology and counseling classes, stuff like that. I got it from St. Cloud State University, which is in Minnesota. It's pretty cold. So like if you consider that university, I wanted to let you know that, yeah, it's pretty cold. It's much, much colder than in Ukraine. And during my time when I was doing my master's, I was also working as a grad assistant, or it's also called graduate assistantship. So this is my way of funding my education, which paid for all my studies. I got a tuition waiver. Plus, I also had a stipend. And at that time, I was working for 20 hours a week. I was working as a graduate assistant in academic advising office. So my work was to help students with selecting classes so they work towards graduation. And I was mainly working with bachelor level students. And now I was also working as a grad intern. So that was not paid internship, but it really helped me a lot with getting my new job after graduation. So I was also working in a career center, helping students with career related stuff. So I also did that for 2 years. And after graduation, I got a job as a career consultant. And I'm working at UT Dallas, University of Texas at Dallas, since May 2021. So as I said, my main goal is I'm working with students. I see students one-on-one for appointments. I help them with career-related stuff, getting them jobs, getting them internships, resumes, stuff like that. But also a big chunk of my work is counseling. So career counseling, helping students with major career exploration, kind of helping them decide what they want to be when they grow up. And also I'm a certified career counselor from NCDA, National Career Development Association. Alrighty, so that was a little bit about my path and overall how my admissions worked. So originally I've heard that you can study in the United States almost for free. I think it was like 2015. So I started applications, but I was super green. I didn't really know a lot of stuff. So I applied to, I think, 3 or 4 universities. And at that time, I didn't really know that you can change your major. So I was applying to different like programs within economics and business related stuff. And to be honest, I wasn't ready. I do know it now. At that time, I didn't know that. I wasn't ready. And I didn't really, I wasn't passionate about economics. I wasn't passionate about finance and stuff like that. So I kind of understand why I didn't, I did get it, but I didn't get any financial aid. And since education in the United States is pretty expensive, I couldn't afford it, so I just didn't go. And at that time, I was like super frustrated, super disappointed, and I just gave up, to be honest. And then like I just did my stuff. I graduated from Newport National University. I was working. I went to China for 2 years, working as an English teacher. And then I decided like, okay, it's time for me to maybe start over and kind of try my luck again. So I tried again. I submitted my applications in 2019 or 2018 maybe. And at that time, I was already 25. So I already was a little more ready, I would say. So at that time, I knew that I didn't want to do economics. I knew that I want to work with students. I knew that I wanted to work within education industry. I knew that I wanted to help people. So basically, I really knew myself more because again, I was 25. So it took a little bit for me to figure that out. So I was trying to find a program, and as I mentioned, college counseling doesn't really exist in Ukraine. So like I didn't know that it's like a career path that you can take. So for me, it kind of took a lot of trials, a lot of search, and eventually I did find this program. It was kind of random, so like I spent like hours and hours and hours for search. I couldn't find the program that I want to apply for, and then I found this one and fell in love. So again, it's very possible to change your career field. Yes, of course, there are some specific details. It depends what kind of stuff you want to study. There are like some limitations to that, but overall, it's pretty possible. Like for some people, it might take longer. For some people, it might take not as much. For me, it took like to get my degree, it took like over 7 years overall. So yeah, 2015 admitted no financial aid, 2019 admitted full financial aid via graduate assistantship, and then in 2021 I graduated with my master's degree. Alrighty. And I wanted to tell you more about graduate programs because there is kind of difference if we compare it to our Ukrainian system. So kind of the first program which I considered was graduate certificate. So it's kind of typically it's a year-long program. It's still kind of grad program, but you're not getting a master's or PhD or like any sort of like degree. So you will not be eligible for a lot of cool stuff like work visa. So it's kind of complicated, but it's a path for a lot of people who want to start with grad certificate first and then maybe transition to master's. A limitation to that for graduate certificates, typically you don't have financial aid. And in my opinion, again, it's my personal opinion, I feel like they're not worth it because typically those are like $10,000-$15,000 a year, but you're not getting a master's for it. So I feel like it's a path, it's for some people, but it's something that I kind of stopped considering after I did my research. The second one is master's. So like, for example, my master's was Master of Science. So typical master programs, but also there are specialized masters, like for example, MBA, or like, for example, Master of Social Work, or for example, Masters in Public Administration or Public Health. So also there are like some unique master's programs. They do exist as well. And the next one is PhD, Doctor of Philosophy. So basically that one is much longer degree, but it gives you a lot of really good options in terms of careers, but also PhD is really good like for future work visas, and a lot of PhDs are fully funded. and professional clinical degrees for those who are considering, for example, medical school or law school and stuff like that. So it's kind of just an overview what exists. For timeline, I get this question a lot. When should I start? My answer is always yes, Siri, or no. So the earlier you start, the better for you, because admissions is a complicated process, and like it is pretty challenging process. So the more time you have, the better for your application. For example, for me, it took several years. It doesn't have to be the same for everyone else, but for a lot of people, it does take years. So kind of steps. The first step is, I feel like the best step to start with is choosing a program. So, and when you're choosing a program, again, since I mentioned that changing majors is possible, so you can have your bachelor's in something else and then apply for a different program in the United States to get a master's or to get a PhD. Of course, you should not be just like a zero in this new topic, but you do need to have some sort of experience, but it's still possible. When you're choosing a program, it's very important to think about your career goals, because if you're thinking that after you get a master's, you want to get a work visa and work for a little bit, then your career has to be connected to your field of study. So for example, let's say you decide to study psychology, but you don't want to work in psychology field, you want to work in something else, you wouldn't be eligible for a work visa after that. So it's kind of important to think about, okay, what are my career goals? What I want to study? Also, if you really don't like your field, if you hate it, if you feel like you have no interest, it will be pretty challenging to graduate, because school in the US is complicated and you have to do a lot of reading, a lot of homework, a lot of stuff, a lot of projects. So if you really hate a field, well, it will be tough. I wouldn't say it's impossible, but it will be tough. So changing versus no change in fields. Again, in United States, the system is really flexible. So for example, my bachelor's was in applied stats. I got my master's in college counseling. Super different fields. Applied stats is more about business, is more about analytical stuff, versus my master's was like more psych-oriented, psychology education program. So it was super different, drastic change. And also it's very possible for a lot of other degrees. For example, like I do know people who, for example, transitioned from engineering to education, or for example, people who transitioned from something like more liberal arts towards, for example, computer science. So it is possible. Of course, there are some limitations. For example, if you're thinking medical school, then they have a completely different path, completely different program. So I'm not really a good advisor on that specifically. But for most majors, most programs, it's very possible. Also, it's important to think about financial aid availability, because even though it's not the most important factor for some people, but if this is something that you need to think about it, because I wouldn't say that all programs are the same when it comes to financial aid. So for example, I feel like in my experience, if you are in STEM fields, so like sciences, technology, engineering, math, I feel like might be a little more funding versus if you apply, for example, to programs in business. But it's my personal experience. I'm not saying like this is 100% true. This is just like what I've seen. But of course, before you submit applications, you do want to talk to people. You do want to talk to program representatives. I will tell you more about that. But just like, again, to let you know that financial aid isn't necessarily available everywhere for every single program in the same amount. So like some programs are funded better. For example, PhDs programs are definitely funded better than, for example, master's or bachelor's. Also, you need to think about visa sponsorship. So like if you want to get a work visa after graduation, you will need to have your employer sponsor your work visa. So for a lot of different programs and fields, it's not super likely, so it's pretty challenging to get a job which will sponsor for a visa, versus, for example, again, STEM, as I mentioned, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, they're a little better with that, I would say. So if you do have this plan to get a work visa after graduation, then you also need to consider that. So those are just like some factors, but again, I feel like the most important is to do what you love. So if you hate this field, but you know that you will have a high salary and you will be likely to get a work visa. Again, you still need to think about, do I want to do it? Because if you hate this field, then yeah, it's kind of tricky. So I wouldn't recommend that. Step 2, after you chose a program, you will want to choose universities. I always recommend applying to at least 4 or 5 schools. In this case, you will have target schools, you will have safety schools. So I would say at least 4 or 5, but of course, the more the better, the more chance you have. But of course, yes, every time when you submit applications, you do have to pay for it. If you don't have like application fee waiver, like for example, opportunity fund or any other financial aid for application specifically. So I do know people who applied to 10 schools and then they were able to choose. So again, it's an option for a lot of people. So if you can also consider that. I personally applied to 5 or 6 schools. I don't quite remember. And to me, it worked, and I still had a choice. What factors to consider? I'll tell you more about that. And something that I want to highlight again is understanding the financial aid availability and conditions. Because, for example, there is a university which offers full financial aid to admitted students, but they might not have that for international students, which is very likely. Or, for example, they do have full financial aid, but not for business students. Or they do have financial aid, but not to master level students, but only for PhD. So you do want to understand that completely. And typically, I wouldn't just limit yourself with a website. For example, yes, on every university, you will find financial aid information, but I feel like it's not enough because it doesn't really tell you about financial aid specifically for your program and specifically for the student population, for example, if you are an international student. So I always recommend talking to program representatives and ask questions about financial aid. Of course, you do want to be you do want to be professional when you're communicating about that stuff. So what factors to consider? Those are just some of them that I wanted to highlight. Some factors will be more important to some people and like kind of vice versa. So it's kind of your choice. So first, that you want to consider type of program. So like, is it master's, is it PhD, is it MBA, and stuff like that. You do want to consider time. So for example, even though PhDs are more funded, I would say, but it does take 4, 5, 6 years to get a PhD. So it's kind of a question, are you ready for 5 years of school? You're ready for this commitment because it's a lot of work. It's a lot of academics. Graduation requirements, again, is pretty same here. So for example, for graduation requirements, do you need to, for example, get 60 credits of classes, or like, do you need to have 40, for example? So those are just things to consider. Quality and reputation. I have a little different opinion than most people do. I feel like you don't have to go to Harvard or Stanford to really get well in your career, to do well in your classes. I feel like any school in the United States, especially if the school offers master's and a PhD, I feel like it's good. For example, my school, it was just a regular state school, Sinclair State University in Minnesota. And I managed to get a job just fine. So I feel like it's really isn't the most important factor, but I know for some people they only want to go to top schools, which I understand. But again, I just want to kind of let you think about it a little bit, that you don't have to go to Harvard to have a good career. Also, you will want to think about admissions requirements. So, for example, some schools that are more selective, they might have, for example, 5% admission acceptance rate, versus some schools, they will be more open. So it's also important to consider. Some schools might require GRE GMAT for grad school admission. Some schools might not. So those things are also important. Alumni career outcomes. You can find this stuff on LinkedIn. So if you go to LinkedIn and find that school in the search bar, there is alumni tab, which you can use. So basically you can search by specific program and see where alumni work. That's really a cool feature. So you can kind of see and imagine yourself doing that job and see what are the different options available to you. Diversity. It is an important factor to me because some states, some cities, some schools, they're not as diverse as, for example, the school that I work in right now. So it's kind of like how you feel about it. And of course, if the place is diverse, you might feel much more comfortable and like in a more friendly environment. So, but I know for many people, it's not the most important factor, but to me it is. The next one over here is cost and financial assistance, which was one of the most important to me because I couldn't afford education if I didn't get financial aid. So you do want to take this time to inquire about what kind of financial aid they have and what is the cost of attendance. Career planning, same here. What are the different options they have in terms of networking, in terms of what are the career help that they offer? Do they offer different workshops? Do they have career counselors and stuff like that? Location and cost of living. For example, when I did my master's, I lived in St. Cloud, Minnesota, which is, I would say, it's a very affordable town, and like you can rent a room for like $350, $400, versus here in Dallas, where I am now, it will be at least $700 for a room. So, and if you, for example, if you do have like financial aid in terms of you have tuition waiver, which means you don't have to pay for education, but you might not have allowance for cost of living. So in this case, places in California might be not the best option because the cost of living is extremely high, versus in some other places like Minnesota, for example, or Texas, it's not that high. Faculty, research, accessibility, and stuff like that. So it's very important to people who are considering PhDs. So, for example, if you want to get a PhD, you do have your research interests. It's really important to see what kind of research faculty does. So basically, for example, if you're interested in researching this specific topic, it's important to see, are faculty involved in research in something similar to that, or they are completely doing something else. So if you do want to get a PhD, it's a very important factor to consider. And quality of research facilities as well. It's more applicable for PhD students, I would say, than masters, but again, important factor for a lot of people too. Alrighty, next slide, step 3, communication. Communication is very, very important. And I do want to highlight it again, it's very important because a lot of people, they kind of neglect it and they just do research on their website and that's it. But building this communication with program representative is extremely important because it might cost you the whole admissions, honestly. Because my first time when I applied, I did get in, but I didn't get financial aid. The biggest problem that I had is I didn't really research enough what kind of financial aid they have. So it's very important to really talk to them, build this communication, and ask questions and stuff like that. So typically the first step that I have is reviewing their website. So when you review their website, you will be able to see what kind of program highlights they have, what kind of faculty they have, what kind of admissions requirements they have, and things like that. But it's not enough. You will also want to talk to them, for example, program representative, coordinators, managers, directors. And typically you will find the information on the program's website. So I want to make a tip quick. It's not grad school representative. So grad school is a completely different department. You will want to talk to your department. For example, Department of Computer Science, master's program. You will want to talk to program representative, program coordinator, program manager, program director. And you will want to ask questions. Typically, you start with emails. I wouldn't recommend calling them, even though you will find their phone number. I don't really recommend that. So email is professional means of communication. So you will want to start with that. You will want to really be intentional about it. You will want to be professional. Make sure that you proofread your email as well. Ask questions about financial aid. You can either ask those questions during like an email, or if you schedule a call with them, if they agree to have a call with you, for example, Zoom call or Teams call or like virtual call, then you will be able to ask those kind of questions. And also keep track of your progress. This is very important. So what I did, I just had Excel sheet where I put all the information about schools. I put like admissions requirements, and also when I was doing communication with them, I was also putting down their replies basically, and also I also input my information from the video calls that I had with them as well. All right. All right, next slide. Sorry, it's a little slow. I wanted to give you this example, and you feel free to take a screenshot. It's kind of just an example. I feel like it's a little more applicable to PhD, but for master's, it will be even easier. So if you get this idea, for master's, it will be even easier. So like we start with, for example, hello, doctor, last name of the professor. You will introduce yourself. My name is first name, last name. For example, I'm senior, and then your major at this specific university. Or for example, if you already got your degree, you can say that you have a bachelor's in ABC from ABC University. And by ABC, I mean just put your university and your major. If it's a PhD, then you will talk about your research interests. And you can kind of like give them a little more details. For example, I've conducted research on ABC project under the advisement of Dr. like specific program coordinator, for example. And then we kind of talk about their research a little bit. So basically how PhD works, you kind of work with your advisor, and it's important that you have similar research topics. And then at the end, we will inquire about if they have, for example, time to have like a virtual call with you to discuss admissions. But also it doesn't have to be specifically that. You can also ask, for example, would you be able to share more information about assistantships that you have available? Are you hiring teacher, research assistants? Or for example, can you tell me more about financial aid options? And you want to be specific. So for example, if you inquire specifically about assistantship, like for example, I had assistantship, then ask about that. If you're interested in specific, for example, specific ABC fellowship, then ask specific questions about that. So we do want to be intentional. We want to ask questions that you cannot really easily find on the website. So we do want to show that you did your homework, you did your research. So basically, this is just, again, it's just a sample, but you can kind of tweak it. But something that to take away from it, it has to be professional. You do want to introduce yourself. You do want to talk about a little bit about your interests, for example, research interests, not hobbies. I mean, like research interests, for example, field of study that you want to do, and you can ask specific questions that you have, and you can also ask, would you be willing to have a Zoom call or like virtual call with me? Alrighty, step 4, application. So like once you decided on a major, once you decided on a school, you will want to start working on your applications. So the first step that I would definitely recommend checking out the deadlines, because some schools, they might have December 1st, some school might have February 15th, some schools might have rolling admissions, which means that you can apply anytime. But I wouldn't really encourage you doing that, because if you apply in May to start in August, there might be no financial aid available anymore. So it's always good to be early in that. Identify how you can stand out. I'll tell you more about that, but I feel like the biggest idea that I have how to stand out is to focusing on the value that you will bring and the social impact. So for example, if we are applying to program, let's say in computer science, we don't want to say I want to study computer science at Stanford because Stanford is top university and I'll be earning $200,000 a year. So it's not our motivation. What we do want to talk about, we want to talk about the impact that we will make. So for example, I want to study computer science because I want to work on developing medical apps which will save lives. And you want to be specific. And my example was just like super short. But you do want to elaborate on your impact that you will want to make, because kind of why they're giving you financial aid, it's kind of an investment in you. So if they see that you are qualified and that you will be able to make impact, then they're more likely to give you financial aid. Elaborate on why you will be a good fit. It's really important to understand that yourself first. So if you're not sure that this program will be a good fit for you, then they might not be sure either, right? So for example, if you decide to apply for master's in psychology, you do want to have specific career goals, and this master's has to help you achieve those goals. So basically, the fit portion is very important. You will need to understand that this specific program will help you achieve your goals, and you need to think about your goals. So what do you want to accomplish in your life, long term, short term? And use resources. A lot of students are not aware of it, but they have a lot of really good resources. So if you, for example, Google Harvard Resume Guide PDF, you will find examples of resume guides, resume examples, because resumes are very, 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 very different from Ukrainian resumes. So that's why it's really important to really use those resources. Also, it doesn't have to be Harvard. It can be any school. So for example, you can Google Princeton Resume Guide PDF, or for example, University of Mississippi Resume Guide, and you can find those. Most likely they will be in open access. It's like 99%, I would say. Same with application essays. A lot of schools will have examples of personal statements. So for example, you can Google, let's say, University of Georgia personal statement example or personal statement sample. You will find a lot of samples. Of course, never copy paste it, but it will give you an idea what they're looking for. So don't just write a story like how you feel. I was born in ABC city. I got my bachelor's in ABC. I want to do ABC. So we don't want to be really cliche, I would say. So definitely use the resources. They are available for you for free if you just like search for them. And I would say that university's website is the best resource. All right, step 5, find, I wanted to say fill in 8 applications and sorry for a typo. So I wanted to kind of just give you the overview that you want to understand how their process works, because even with assistantship is like just one type of financial aid. For example, I got it, which means graduate assistant. You work as a graduate assistant. But even with assistantship, it works really different for different programs and different schools. It's super different, so you need to understand how the process works. Sometimes when you apply to a program, they will consider you automatically for financial aid. Sometimes you need to submit extra application. Sometimes you need to submit, for example, like in my school, admissions was one process and getting financial aid was a completely different process. So basically I got in and then I applied to 20 different jobs on campus, jobs of graduate assistants. So it was a completely different process. In some schools, they will consider you automatically. So you do want to talk to your program representative and ask questions. If I'm interested in gaining, interested in securing assistantship, for example, how does the process look like? Also, for example, if you work as graduate assistants on campus, kind of admin duties, versus if you work as a teaching assistant or research assistant, those are also completely different processes. So definitely you will need to understand the process before you submit applications, because sometimes students, they submit applications and they don't know about the process of getting financial aid. So they get in, but they never applied for financial aid. They didn't get it, and they are kind of like lost, and they're like, why didn't get in? Why didn't get the assistantship? Because you never applied for it. So don't be like that. Customize your application materials, resumes, cover letters. Especially it works if you are getting, as I said, assistantship, because assistantship is ultimately, it's a job. So you work in campus, and for this work, they pay for your education, they pay you a stipend. Stipend is not like stipendia na ukrainski. Stipend is more about like a salary for 20 hours. So, for example, if you apply to 5 different jobs on campus or graduate assistants, for example, I've worked in academic advising and in career services. Those would be completely different applications, because for academic advising, they require one set of skills. For career services, they require other set of skills. Sometimes you will be working, for example, as a marketing assistant, then you will need to show your marketing skills. Or for example, sometimes you might work in, let's say, Department of IT. So you will need to have like IT experience. So basically those jobs, and it's same with the job process, like you would search for job in Ukraine. You want to show them you will be a good fit. So you do want to customize your application materials every single time when you submit those applications. And prepare for interviews, because a lot of times, especially if you get assistantship, you will be required to have an interview, and you will really need to show them that you will be a good fit. So you will need to definitely, again, customize your applications and also prepare for interviews, so you will be able to share your experience as it relates to the job that you're applying for, if it's graduate assistant job, for example. I also wanted to give you this screenshot. I took it from the Princeton University website. I wouldn't necessarily say that it will work for every single program, because programs are different, deadlines are different. And also for international student might be a little different, because we do need to take TOEFL, IELTS. Some programs will require GRE or like other tests like LSAT and stuff like that. But overall, I feel like it's a good infographic, because you do want to start with research in schools, programs, application requirements. It's your start. You do want to understand what do you need to do to get admitted. Also, you will need to register for tests and begin prepping for your like tests and kind of preparing for tests. In my experience, I did take GRE, but as COVID started, I feel like not as many schools anymore want you to take GRE. A lot of schools still do, especially for PhD, but not all of them. So you will also want to, again, take a look at your schools, your programs. Do they require GRE? Do they require GMAT? Do they require another test? But definitely you will need to take some English tests. For example, I took TOEFL, but it can be IELTS, it can be Duolingo in some schools. So you will want to see what requirements your school has. And for example, if your schools want TOEFL, then take TOEFL, if you can, of course. So you will want to definitely pay attention what kind of exams you will need to take, so you can prep for those. Take tests. It doesn't have to be 5 months before deadline. It can be, for example, I know people who took their test like a year ago, and then it wasn't really good, so they retook it. Or like some people might do it like closer to deadline. But of course, the earlier you take it, the better, because you will have more time for other application materials. So again, definitely start with researching what kind of stuff you need, what kind of exams you need. Talk to alumni, current students and programs of interest. Talk about potential recommenders. So when it comes to alumni and current students, you cannot really ask this question the program representative. So for example, let's say you find a program in the university, you cannot just say, can you give me contacts of your alumni? Because they're not allowed to do that, because it's personal, private information. What you can do, you can find them on LinkedIn, which is a very good path. Not everyone will respond, but a lot of people will. So you can start your research with LinkedIn. Meet with departments, academic advisor, other faculty to review programs of interest. This is definitely something I do recommend. Not everyone will be willing to meet with you for a virtual call, but a lot of them will. So definitely reach out to them, ask your questions, ask if they would be willing to have a virtual call with you, where you would be able to ask questions about admissions, ask questions about financial aid, ask questions about alumni career outcomes and stuff like that. Then, for example, 8 weeks, it can be earlier, can be a little later. You will want to start drafting your essays. So definitely meet with people who will help you. So for example, different career coaches might help with that, writing centers, other like feedback, other faculty that you worked with. So basically any people that might be able to help you with drafting it or at least review it. I definitely recommend getting as many eyes as possible. So for example, ask someone to proofread your application materials, your personal statement and stuff like that. Take or retake tests if applicable. Of course, it doesn't work for everyone. Your test might be good from the first attempt. Ask for letters of recommendation. So that's a big one. And it's a tough one for us Ukrainians, because when you're asking for recommendations, not everyone will know English. For example, I asked my faculty member for my bachelor's, and it was a little challenging because we had to work together with like translators so we can get that done, because those recommendations most likely they will be in electronic format. So basically what you do, you submit their email addresses, and then to their email they will get a letter where they would need to submit your recommendation for you. So it could be a letter, it could be just, for example, like or scale. How would you assess this person's communication skills, 1 to 5, for example? But you do want to think about that. Those people could be your professors, your teachers, your mentors, your coaches, your supervisors. I always recommend getting at least 1 or 2 from faculty and 1 or 2 from people who know your professional background, for example, your former supervisors. Definitely see how the process works, because it works differently in different universities. And especially if the person you work with doesn't know English, you will need to arrange stuff like, for example, translators or things like that. Finalize essays, writing samples. Writing samples are not required everywhere, but for some programs they are required. Request transcripts. This is the biggest difference that I have, because for transcripts for American students, if you got your bachelor's in United States and you're getting your master's here, then it's a super easy and quick process. For us, unfortunately, it's not that easy. So this is the biggest change that I want to kind of like highlight, that you have to think about that at least 6 months beforehand, because I got my transcript evaluated by Wes. And Wes is one of the biggest ones, but there are others, for example, other NACES members. So you will want to first identify what kind of transcript requirements for international students your university has, and different universities might have different requirements, and then you will need to work on that. So again, for example, my school, they wanted Wes, so I went with Wes, and it took several months. So I think 2 or 3 months, because they had to get apostille, I'm not sure how do you say that, right? I don't really remember, but I had to get it first in Ukraine with Nova Poshta, and after that I will need to send my documents to West United States. So I had to pay for FedEx, and it was a long process. So definitely make sure that you understand the process and you work on that early. And then by first deadline, you will want to submit your applications. Of course, if your deadline is December 1st, don't do that November 31st. You want to be at least a week earlier, because you might find some hidden things, like, for example, additional essays, or maybe something with your transcript. So you will want to definitely do everything earlier than on this slide, but I still wanted to give you the slide so you can kind of see what is the process. All right, application components. I kind of talked a little bit about that, but I want to give you a little more details about that. And I do see questions in chat. I will come back to those during Q&A portion. So application materials, application components. So the first one is transcripts. Definitely make sure that you understand that early. What do you need to do? Because again, different universities have different requirements. For example, school that I studied, they wanted WES. School that I work right now, they want their own evaluation, so they do it themselves. So you just have to pay for it. Other schools might want, for example, official transcript sent from specifically your Ukrainian university to them. Some schools might want to have, for example, not WES, but ECE, or other NACES members. So you will want to, when you create this list of universities that you want to apply to, you want to see what requirements they have for international students. Make sure you understand that, because for international students, it's different. So work on that early. Resume, CV. So typically you need a resume, and resume and CV are different things. CV is more for academia. So if you're searching for a job of a professor or researcher, then you will need a CV. For admissions, typically you have a resume. Resume has to be 1 page. You can find resume samples on different universities' websites. As I said, for example, if you Google Princeton resume guide, you will find the guides from different universities. You can compare, and you can find resume examples, which you can utilize for different fields. So for example, if you are in field of psychology, you can find specifically psychology examples. Make sure that you follow US formats, because it's very different from Ukrainian one. No photo, no personal data like your date of birth, your marital status, your nationality, nothing like that should be on your resume. Make sure you understand that. Again, find examples. This is the best way to create that, right? Letters of recommendation, again, there are a lot of samples available online. Just make sure that your recommendation is not Ukrainian характеристика, because in our, like, I know our teachers are more used to характеристика versus recommendation letter. Recommendation letter is more about your unique story. So it's not just she's responsible, detail-oriented, analytical student, she behaved well. It's not like that. Recommendation letter has to be more unique. So basically, you do want your recommender to talk about their personality. You do want to maybe use some specific example from your life that, for example, let's say you published a paper with their help. So you want them to use that specific example, or maybe you help organize events, then they can talk about that. So it has to be story with examples, not just характеристика. Application essay, again, it has to be unique. Don't follow cliche formats with just like your biography or like autobiography. So it has to be something catchy. You do want to talk about your goals, short-term, long-term. You do want to talk about how will this program help you achieve those goals. You do want to talk about impact that you will make on the world and the community. How will your career help basically the society that you live in? So it has to be unique. It has to be catchy. It has to be with social impact. This is very important. English tests, again, take a look at what kind of tests your universities require. Most likely will want TOEFL or IELTS or Duolingo or something else, but TOEFL, I feel like it's most common. In some program-specific requirements, they're not required everywhere, but a lot of schools will want tests like GRE, GMAT. So if you need it, you have to take it. Sometimes they have requirement, for example, you don't have to take GRE if your GPA is higher than 3.0 out of 4. Then in this case, you don't have to have it. But sometimes you don't need GRE for application to get in, but sometimes you need GRE to be considered for teaching assistantship to get full financial aid. So make sure that you take it if you need it. Write-in samples, portfolio, those are also optional for some schools, required for other schools, not required for, like, so basically it depends on the school. Some schools want it, some schools don't. Interview audition, interviews are very likely. I had interviews for all my programs, but I know that it's not the case for every single program. And audition is a little more for artistic students, which I'm not. So I don't really know a lot about it, but it's common for a lot of programs, artistic ones. Improving your application. So when you're working on your application, you want to stand out, you want to be unique. And those are just some things that I want you to consider when you're working on your application, when you're working on your background. Again, for some people, application takes a while because you will need to work on your background. And I know we don't have a lot of time, so I'll talk briefly about that. Career goals, make sure you understand what kind of goals you have. How will this program help you achieve those? What impact you will make on the world, on the community. Do more. If you feel like you don't have enough in your application, do more like volunteering, projects, jobs, internships, and tell your story about your path, your challenges, and mistakes that you had in your life. Some tips, feel free to take a screenshot if you want, but you will want to kind of give the reader introduction, insight, what drives you, what kind of motivation you have, why you're interested in this field. Start with something really catching, like hook your reader with your opening remarks. So for example, using a story. Don't say things like, I've always dreamt to become an engineer. So because it's very cliche. Don't complain a lot in your story. You can talk about your challenges, but don't make it like just a whole story of complaints. Don't talk about money as a motivator. As I said, don't say I want to get a PhD in computer science because I want to earn 200,000 K. Don't remind the school about its ranking. So don't say I want to go to Stanford because Stanford is #1 in the United States. Don't get the name of schools wrong if you are applying to multiple schools. So just make sure that if you're applying to Harvard, you're not saying thank you for the time to consider me to apply to Stanford. And also don't incorporate a lot of technical language or uncommon words. Try to make your essay understood by more people. Sources for funding, again, for example, mine was assistantship. There are several types of assistantships. You can read more about that on their website or school websites. Some of them are graduate teaching research assistantships, or GA, TA, RA. And application process varies, as I said. Sometimes it's automatically, sometimes it's not. Fellowships, scholarships, and grants. Scholarship is a different concept from our Ukrainian scholarship. So, for example, я була на бюджеті в Україні, тут такого немає взагалі. І стипендія в Україні не означає стипендія тут. Scholarship can be $3,000 or $500. It doesn't mean full financial aid. And more about assistantships, again, you work for 20 hours a week. It can be graduate, research, or teaching assistantship. Benefits might include tuition waiver, which means that you don't pay for your studies, stipend, health insurance, but benefits vary. Some schools only cover, for example, half of your tuition cost. Some schools will not cover health insurance. So, for example, mine didn't. I had to pay for health insurance. And the stipend. Stipend is typically super low, but some schools have it like a little higher. Tips: understand the process, create unique applications, and prepare for interviews. All right, we have around 10 minutes for Q&A and final tips. So it's a very complicated process. It's a lot of work, no guarantees, but don't give up because it's very possible. Consider cost of applications and financial aid, and do have a backup plan. So, for example, European universities or something else, because it's important not to get super frustrated. Whew, that was a lot of information.
Thank you, Yuliia. Thank you. That was very informative. I learned a lot as well today. And we do have some questions in the chat. Let's start with the first one from Dmitro. Dear Yuliia, how did you prepare for English tests for university application, and did you pass GRE?
For English tests, I have a little different story because my parents made me learn English when I was 6. They were really, really pushy about that. So English was kind of the only subject that I learned a lot. So by the time I was 19, I had advanced level. I had C1. So to me, prepping for TOEFL wasn't a big deal. I spent a month just doing practice tests, but I know it's not the case for a lot of other people. So I used Magoosh. You can find an app. Magoosh is the biggest one, and I also used official TOEFL book. So I just bought a book and I just did the practice test. This is what I did. I also did take GRE. For that, I also used official book. It's pretty big one with tests. So I had to really refresh the math, the English part. English part I feel like is even more complicated than math, especially if you do high school in Ukraine. Then I feel like that's you already have that knowledge. But yes, official materials in Magoosh, those were my biggest resources.
Okay, thank you so much. There was another question from Dmitro. How did you prepare official or unofficial transcripts for your diplomas for? I guess you did answer that question already. I think that's something that is worth mentioning, that none of the international delivery companies are working in Ukraine now. So it kind of becomes a struggle for Ukrainian students, but still we would recommend to sign up for the consultation with EducationUSA, and we will just guide you through the process, how it can be done at the moment. Thank you. And I have a question as well. So you did mention that you worked with your teachers or your professors in Ukrainian university and kind of helped them to write the recommendation, right, for you. So would you give any tips on how to work with the recommenders? Because, academic integrity is very important. So we don't write the text for the recommenders. But how would you actually, explain that it's not characteristica, but actually recommendation, and that you're story?
Yeah, it's a big one. You have to talk to them. Yes, you don't write recommendation for them, but you have to talk to them. You have to explain that this is not a characteristica. You have to explain that, and you can even come up with stories yourself. So, for example, remember that a year ago I published this paper. Your professor might not remember about it, especially when I was asking recommendations. I was 25, so and the last time I took a class from that professor was 6 years ago. So he remembers me, but he didn't remember details. I did. So when I had a conversation with him, I told him, remember when I was sophomore, I published a paper on this topic. I would appreciate you talking about that. So you kind of refresh their memories. Also, you need to explain that this has to be a story. It has to talk about your personal qualities and also like maybe your academic qualities, your academic, for example, your preparation, so they can tell them more about like how basically they need to show the admissions committee that you are ready to grad school, you're ready for grad school. So when you have this conversation, tell them that it has to be like a story about yourself using specific examples, and you can kind of help them refresh that in their memories because they might not remember that. But the biggest is really having this conversation, explaining that it has to be at least like, I would say like 1 page. Sometimes it's 2 pages. So they cannot just like list your characteristics. They have to, for example, if they're saying this person has great communication skills, why? Because when she was in undergrad, she tutored other students. Or when she was in undergrad, she organized cultural trips. So it has to be proof, not just saying that she's hardworking, detail-oriented, analytical. It has to be proof. So I feel like that's the biggest advice that I have. Of course, yes, you don't write them for them, but you need to tell them more about it because most likely they're not familiar with the process.
Thank you for that advice. I think that's very valuable advice for all our prominent students. Well, I think we are out of questions for today. I just want to say thank you, big thank you for this session based on your professional and your personal experience, which means a lot, really. Being Ukrainian and studying in the United States. That's great. Thank you so much, Yuliia, and we hope to have you more in our sessions.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. You can find me. If you search Yuliia Sobko, you'll find me. I'm not sure if I can drop a link in chat or I don't see it. Let me. But you should be able. Let me find a link quick and put it in chat. So feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. This is also, I feel like, one of the best ways to reach out to me. Can I drop a link in chat? I don't really see it.
I guess you can share it with me. Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I'll just put it in private chat. Yeah. Feel free to reach out. I'll be happy to help. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, and have a nice day or evening. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. You too. Have a good day. Bye.